So many guys that I know, and I guess it has to do, I'm 50 years old. So I guess it starts happening maybe a little before and around this age, have gone through divorces. I fortunately have never been through one, and I know very little about divorce. But I brought someone here, Joe Dillon, that I'm excited to have. He's with equitablemediation.com, and he helps people on either side to get through a divorce in the way that hopefully is the least amount of pain possible. And we're going to dive into this. And whether you're going through a divorce or you've been through one or you know someone, so you can take this information and pass it along to them, I think it's going to be a big help. Thanks for being here with me, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joel. I appreciate it.
So, how'd you get into this? How are you? First of all, tell us briefly, we're going to dive in, but tell us what you do for people who are potentially going through a divorce.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a divorce mediator. So I'm a neutral third party, and I work with both sides to help them resolve all the issues they have to get a divorce. So I bring options to the table. I help them do the discovery, forms, worksheets, and we help them basically avoid using lawyers or going through the court process. And as you kind of mentioned a little bit, it's definitely a more peaceful alternative. It's far more cost effective and it takes months instead of years. So we really just try to tell people, look, yeah, if you've got kids, if you want to maintain your sanity, maintain your financial health, definitely you don't need to burn things to the ground. And that's the people we work with, which is it's very rewarding. The folks we work with, they recognize that, they recognize they don't want to do that, and so they reach out to us.
So I've heard that this is kind of a cliche or a saying that's out there.
Yeah,
When a woman asks for a divorce, she's probably been contemplating it for a couple of years, but it always
yep,
catches the guy by surprise. Is that
yeah.
true?
100%. We follow, a lot of our colleagues in research and stuff like that. There's a law firm out of the UK that did a study about 2 years ago, and they asked their people who came in, to see them, how long have you been contemplating divorce? And when they averaged it all out, it was 2 years and 1 month. So there's that 1 month. You got to get that in there. And so typically what winds up happening is one person has been thinking about this for years, and typically, because 70% of divorces are filed by women, that would indicate that a majority of the women have been thinking about it, and it does catch the guys off guard. We as men, and my wife Cheryl, she always teases me about this. She's like, "You're such a fixer. You always want to fix everything, right?" So, we're always like, "No, but this can be saved. This can be fixed. We don't have to get a divorce." And the wives are like, "I've been thinking about this for a long time." And the guys have kind of, maybe had an inkling, but they floated along kind of in their little bubble. And then when the wife finally just says, "You know what? This is it. I got to move forward," it really does catch them off guard. And that, I think, is part of the difficulty, with guys in divorce is they want to fix it. They're surprised by it. But the truth of the matter is the writing's been on the wall for a while and they probably just haven't recognized it. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that from working with guys who've gone through divorces, and now I have someone I can send them to you. I That's just what I've noticed. Like maybe they weren't very aware all this time. So what could a guy do to avoid being in this situation, getting in a divorce? What does he do? Not
Yeah,
when he comes to talk to you. What should he have been doing
right.
2, 3 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things, and again, I'll just totally, stereotype myself, is that if somebody said to me, "Oh, you should go to couples counseling, or you should go to therapy," I'd be like, "Ah, no, I don't think so." And it's so funny. Like if you look at our bookshelves, I'm an avid reader, and so is my wife. I've got the he was taken hostage in Moscow and he shot his way out of his captors. Like those are the books I'm reading, and my wife is reading like finding your inner child and discussing it with your parents, like so the two of us are on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And a lot of that goes down to the languages we speak, the love languages, and all of those things. I think for guys, the big thing is recognizing that your wife is not you. And she is different than you. And she does have different interests and she does need different things and communicate. And in your world, just because you did X, Y, or Z, like I came home and said, "Honey, look, I put in a new gym. Isn't that great? Now we don't have to go to the gym. We can save money." There's a real conversation in our house. And my wife is like, "Are you implying that I need to lose weight?" And you're like, "Oh boy," and she's like, "Well, I like going to the gym. That's where I see my friends. I take my classes. They have a good juice bar." Meanwhile, all I thought was, great, we don't have to get in the car when it's 42 degrees below outside and we can work out. So it's checking in with your spouse, asking them the questions that, the classics, how are your day? How are things going? And really just trying to stay connected, right? Just really making those efforts, even if they're small. We call them, touch points, right? Just recognizing that someone did something, saying please and thank you, just a hand on the shoulder as you walk by. What do you want to do this weekend? Where should we go on vacation? All these like little things, we tend to, again, going back to my home gym example, I was so proud that I bought this $5,000 Smith cage and rack and machine and, these grand gestures, right? And my wife is like, I would have been just happy with like a set of 5-pound dumbbells from Target covered in rubber, right? So we always try to go big. Wives are probably looking to go a little smaller. And so that's what I'd say to the guys: pay attention to the small stuff, the small moments, make the small moments happen. Because that's a lot of the stuff that shows up in our mediations when people are arguing and wives are really kind of retorting with, well, I never wanted any of that. I never said that. Like, I just wanted you to be home on time for dinner once a week, right? Or take the kids to the dentist once a year, right? Like all that little stuff. So that's what I'd say, guys. Keep an eye on the small stuff because that's the stuff that matters most.
Well, Joe, I got good news. You and I would be happily married with that gym in the
Yeah,
garage.
that's right,
Yeah,
man.
that would be great because my garage is a 3-car garage and it's a full gym. And so I
There you
love
go.
that. Checking in, you said, I think one thing that I've done occasionally with my wife is I say, what could you use more of from me? What could I help more with? Or what would be
Yep.
better for you? What do you need? And this is different. It's a little bit deeper than just like, how you doing? But I found that
Yeah.
question worded that way seems to give me something. Another thing is you mentioned books, and right back there, you mentioned one of them who's
Yep.
been on the podcast, Dr. Gary Chapman, The Five Love Languages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, he's a phenomenal guy. I've actually included
Hmm.
his lessons in my book and giving him full credit. That guy has, I think every couple should go do that test. It's free, it's online, and you get to find out
Yeah.
what really moves your spouse or girlfriend. And lastly,
Yep.
before we move on here, and I like how you said, where would you like to go on vacation and these questions. But I think one more step that a guy can take is, speaking of guys, because that's mostly who listens to this podcast, is
Yeah.
planning that trip, making it
Absolutely.
special, right? Not just being
Yep.
a passenger along for the ride and letting the wife do all of that. So, what are the reasons that these women, 70% of the divorces are started by women? Why are women filing for divorce or being interested in starting that process?
Yeah, a lot of our clients, and you mentioned this, I'm in my 50s as well. A lot of our clients are in their 50s. They're either empty nesters or the kids are seniors in high school, freshmen in college. They're really in that place now. And we've seen, we've been practicing a long time and we've seen how gender roles have shifted. Women are active in the workforce, which is great, holding leadership positions when they've got a role, for example, and we say, I was raised by my mom and my nana, right? So single mom, only child, Italian mother, Italian grandmother. And we were talking about this Italian, Irish, Cuban, all the very, emotive, very demonstrative backgrounds, right? And that's part of it is that, these women have these roles, feel very strongly about these roles. And then when that role is done, I believe they think that there's a part of them that says, well, I've now done my time. I've played my part. I've worked inside the home. I've raised these kids, and now it's my time. Because we're all starting to see that, right? As we watch, and we'll keep this family friendly, but as the geopolitical world spirals out of control around us, I think a lot of us are just going, man, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I just want to have some fun. I just want to live my
Mhm.
life, right? And that's what's happening. They're coming to that place where they say, you know what? I'm not angry at my husband. I don't hate him. He's a great father. We hear that all the time. He's a wonderful guy. I still love him. But I just want different things in life. And that message comes through time and time again. And that goes back to Joel, what we were just saying, right? You want different things. Well, guys, maybe if you understood what your wife wanted and you were checking in on those things, then the different things she wanted could be things you want too. And you could go along with them. Like my wife and I, for example, I never owned a dog. If she had her way, she would fill our house with dogs. So I'm like, okay, volunteering at an animal shelter might not be high on my list, right? It might be going to the library, for example, as we talked about reading, but she wants to be involved in that. I'm going to show an interest in that with her. And I'm going to go feed these animals or take them on walks. And they're adorable and you clean their cages or do whatever it is. And then we, of course, came home with dogs,
Yeah, how'd that work out? So
Yeah, it
what
didn't work out
is
great.
have you now I'm really curious, any times where people want to file for divorce, maybe you help them go through that process. Have you ever seen the regrets?
Yeah, absolutely. Just had a client recently, and they just took the agreement, and I told them, look, that's the beauty of mediation, right? With mediation, you're in the process right before you enter the court system, and we all know anyone who's been involved in the courts. My parents litigated their divorce when I was a teenager, and it was a disaster. It took years. They spent tens of thousands of dollars. This was back in the '80s, so that would be hundreds of thousands of dollars today. And once you're in there, man, it's like you're sucked in. You're not getting out. And it's just like, what is that for? What's they just when I thought I got out, they brought me back in. It's
Mm,
like it sounds like the mob, but it really is when you get into that system. But in mediation, you're outside of that. You're negotiating in privacy, confidential. And sometimes folks get to the end of the process and they'll look at each other and they'll realize it's like a high stakes game of chicken. And
mm,
then somebody will finally be like, what are we doing here? And then I'll be like, I'm a neutral third party, right? So I can't push them to divorce or I can't push them to reconcile, but I definitely will jump in and go, I was asking myself the same thing about the two of you,
mm.
because sometimes they just need somebody like me who I've had the good fortune as a guy, I speak that language, but as I mentioned, raised by my mom and my grandma. So I've also got that side of the house, right? Like I cook, I clean, I have that feminine side. And when I'm talking to client couples, most of our couples are heterosexual, but we do have some same-sex couples too, which is great. And so then when you get into that conversation, you can say, to the guy, like, what I think your wife is really trying to say, and then vice versa, right? So it's almost like I speak multiple languages. And then when
Yeah.
they start hearing that, they realize that they're actually in agreement. They're actually on the same page. They just didn't. It'd be like, if you've ever traveled, and this will make us laugh, right? Is that, I was in France and my wife speaks French. So that's pretty cool, right? And we're sitting in
Mhm.
a restaurant and there's a couple from England, got the accent. And the guy is just yelling at the waitress louder in English for something, right? Because if I speak English louder to the French speaking waitress, she's going to understand. My wife
Right.
calls her and says in French what the guy wants, right? And we all giggle and, whatever. That's kind of what happens in mediation. They're just sort of yelling at each other. And I'm like, and I'll laugh. I'm like, you guys are saying the exact same thing. You're just not listening to each other. So,
You just
so
help them
that's
bring it
it.
down.
Bring it down, man. Just let's take the temperature down and let's start asking some questions instead of making some accusations.
You got me curious now. If women ask for 70, if the divorces are 70% of the time are started by
Yeah.
women,
Yeah.
what happens in a woman and woman relationship? I mean, are those then a higher percentage
Yeah.
than men?
What's challenging about that? So this is interesting. Despite this being a same-sex couple, folks still do fall into what I'll call stereotypical gender roles.
Mm,
There
yeah.
is definitely in a same-sex couple, one a more nurturing, home-based individual, one that's more career, extra, outside the home-based. And so it's never that, we're not treating people based on stereotypes. We're just trying to figure out what are their interests, right? What are their goals for this process, and being able to talk to them in those kinds of languages. And what's interesting about same-sex divorces, and we've had men and we've had women, is that they tend to be definitely more high conflict. And my philosophy is that couples, same-sex couples have fought forever, really for the right to marry, finally get the right to marry, and now it's ending in divorce. And I really feel this sadness that falls over them, this disappointment almost in themselves. It's like, man, we finally got the right to marry, and we're going to end just like everybody else,
Yeah.
and I can sense that. You can see that, right? With our heterosexual couples, it's, this is just a normal part for the course, get a divorce, that's kind of it. But
Yeah.
it's a good question, right? You definitely see that.
I heard a stand-up comic years ago when that was being debated about same-sex marriages, and he was a straight guy, and he goes, "Wait till you get it. You're gonna wish you didn't have it." I guess he'd been divorced a few
Absolutely.
times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the gentrification of all of relationships, and it just people fall in patterns, right? As I say, these patterns exist for a reason, because sometimes they're the path of least resistance. Sometimes it's just the way things work, and they work as efficiently or effectively, and folks do fall into that. But you're right, in terms of when I think back to our same-sex couples, we've had more female same-sex couples than male same-sex couples. So
Yeah,
yes,
that makes
good
sense.
question. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you this at the beginning, but I wanted to jump right in. How'd you get into
Yeah.
this?
Oh, jeez. It's funny. As I just shared, right? My parents litigated their divorce. So I'm that classic, sat in the back of the courtroom. My dad was so mad at my mom, he never spoke to me or her again. So after the last time I saw him was in court in the hallway of the courtroom. And then he just took off and got remarried and had another family. And, I found out, got a letter, he died. That was about it. So that was basically my adult, from teenage on, parenting with my father or lack thereof. And, my background, so I have an MBA in finance. A lot of people think you have to be a lawyer to be a mediator, and you don't. When we think about divorce, it's not to be cute about it, but three of the four issues in a divorce are financial, right? Alimony, child support, property division. The other one is parenting, right? So parenting doesn't have necessarily a financial component, although kids do cost money. So in a way, they kind of do. And with my background is in negotiation and finance. So I have training at Harvard and the program on negotiation in Northwestern. So I used to do, when I was in corporations, I used to do like high dollar contract negotiations, financial contracts. So I'd always be working with teams of lawyers, salespeople, clients. And then I would do like some, buyouts, mergers, that kind of stuff. And then it was kind of a grind. Had got downsized from a job, and I was just kind of like, I don't want to go back into that grind. I don't know. And my mother-in-law, of all people, which was great, I get along great with my mother-in-law. She says, I have a friend who's a mediator, and I think mediator. And so I spoke to the friend. She was a mediator for the Jersey City Police Department in New Jersey. When you see those late night negotiations, right, with people across the table trying to negotiate the contract. And she was trying to get both sides to agree. And I'm like, well, that looks interesting. So what should I do? And I'm like, kid of a litigated divorce, want to avoid that. Finance background, divorce is money. I got an idea. And
Yeah.
so, as they say, the rest is history. And
How long
I've
ago
been
was
doing
that?
it now. At Oh yeah, so been a while, and it's hard to believe that, right? When your brain, you're like, I'm not that old, am I?
It flies by.
People avoid court, reach these amicable agreements, know that they can still co-parent their kids, and that's kind of the soapbox lecture I give them. Like, look, don't be like my dad. Don't cut your nose off to spite your face just because you're angry at your soon to be ex-wife. Don't cut your kids out of your life. That's just dumb. And I've gone through as an adult really trying to reconcile that, because I'm like, well, what the hell did I do? Right? I was an A student. I was an athlete. I'm like, oh, did I do something to make you angry? Like, what just happened here? And unfortunately, I never got that answer. So to this day,
I
I'm
think you
like,
know the
well,
answer. You probably did
yeah,
nothing. Those are
yeah,
adult
of
things,
course.
and you were a kid.
I know, right? It's just, man, just makes you
Easy to
scratch your
accept it
head
on the
though.
surface. It's hard when you feel it. I get it. So
Yeah,
give
absolutely.
me give me some advice for the average guy out there whose wife, and
Okay.
and again I'll say the guy because I run men's groups, and
Yep.
because that's who's listening to us for the most part, and I
Hmm.
see the statistics. It's like 90% men. So, and the 10% women who probably watch it share it with a guy. That's my guess that they'll pass it along. So, okay, a wife just said, you know what? I'm not in love, or I want to move on, or I want to take care of me. I want a
Hmm.
divorce. Where do we go from here? Because that's where I think so many guys are lost, and they don't even talk to friends a lot of the time. They don't know what to do. What do we do?
Yeah. Okay. So great. So if wife, first thing you have to confirm is, has wife made up her mind? Sometimes that's a symptom of frustration, right? Sometimes you get to that point, even like think about your friends, right? Like sometimes you're just so mad at somebody, you just don't know what to do. So you just freak out on, right? And that might be your wife saying to you, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm at my wit's end, I don't know what to do. So let's get a divorce. So the first thing you want to do is really check in and ask, have you been thinking about this? How long have you been thinking about this? Have you spoken to someone other than your friends about this, right? Because more often than not, women will go therapy, talk to a counselor, use that time to work through their feelings and make the decision on whether or not to get a divorce. Now, if the answer comes back as yes, I've done all those things, then you're pretty sure that there's not going to be a chance for you to change your mind. All right. Because women are good at this. They've planned, they've thought it through, they've made their decision. So guys, don't try and convince, cajole. It's not going to happen. It really isn't. And we call that the reluctant spouse. We have an internal name for it. We just know who this guy is. It's like, oh boy, this is not going to end well, because a little fun fact is that it takes two people to be married, but only one to file for divorce, right? So now you have a choice. You're going to get a divorce, and now you have to decide what option you want to divorce. So on our website, you mentioned at the beginning, we have a resource center, and in there we have a guide on the 5 options for divorce. And that guide will walk you through, should I do it myself? Should I do it online? Should I mediate, collaborate, or litigate? And you have to think, and it'll ask you all these questions about, can you do this? Do you want to do that? Da, 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 da. And so now your choice is, what method do I use to get a divorce? Now, typically we like to see that as a cooperative decision, right? Where the spouses, because I work for both of them, they choose the mediator together, they do their research. If your wife is unsure, if she's frustrated, that's your opportunity. And as a professional negotiator, when I think about what I really do, I'm a professional negotiator. There are 2 questions that you can ask that are so powerful. I'm sure, Joel, with you and your group, you kind of do this stuff as well. They always either start with how or what. Okay, well, guys, when you're listening, think about it. How can we fix this? What can I do to make it better? Notice it's not you wanted to rah, rah, right? It's like the blame, the finger pointing. This is the moment you are standing on that bridge, man. This is the crossroad. And it's like, okay, how did we get here? What can we do? What can we do to change this? And this may require counseling, couples counseling, therapy. You mentioned before about the love languages. My wife, Cheryl, and I'll say air quotes, made me read that book, but I'm glad I did. And we discussed it at dinner. We also read the Gottman book on, the marriages, right? So, and we bookshopped it, workshopped it together. These are the kinds of things that your wife is looking for you to do, is to acknowledge there's a problem and get involved in the solution, rather than making excuses. I'm busy at work. You don't understand, dot, 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 or you blame, right? So you notice the difference, right? It's bringing it as, what can we do collectively? That's really the key. So that's what I say, guys. Check where your wife is. Is it, have I been thinking about it a while, or am I just so frustrated with you, I just don't know what to do? And then those are kind of the 2 paths. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Communication is probably one of these issues that leads to this.
Yeah. And you know what's funny too? When we start out, right? Before we have kids, before we really get into it, we have shared goals, don't we? Right? When my wife and I first got married, we're like, okay, what do we want to do? Do we want to have a kid? She was self-employed. I'm like, do we want to start a business together? Do we want to always live in New Jersey? Do we want to move somewhere? Right? We had all these ideas and all these goals. And then as life goes by, a lot of us can just let those goals, die on the vine. And then your list and my list are completely different. And now we don't have anything shared we're working towards. And isn't that the greatest thing? Like when you've got your spouse, like Cheryl and I, we started equitable mediation, God only knows, like 18 years ago. And, she's been working with me pretty much ever since. And so as unusual as it might be, and you understand this, work with your spouse, that can be challenging at times, what people like, because she's probably listening in the other office. But, certainly it's also rewarding because you have a common goal. You have something you're sharing, something you're working towards, not just I do this, you do that. Now we're perfect strangers. So one thing that we've done, and here's another tip for guys, which again, this sounds kind of a little awkward, but my doctor of all people told me this. I love my doctor. He's a cool dude. He's all about like treating you as a person, not, feeding you with pills and stuff. And he's like, part of my job is to keep you healthy. And part of you being healthy is making sure you have a healthy sex life, a healthy love life, a healthy marriage, right? He's just that kind of dude. And he's like, here's what I want you to do and report back to me next year at your physical. So my physical's coming up. I got to report back. He's like, I want you and your wife to each take a legal pad or notepad. And I want you to sit in chairs, whether it's at the beach, in a park, wherever it is. And I want you to make a list, your bucket list of all the stuff you want to do. And then you're going to hand each other the pads. And you're going to look at her list and she's going to look at your list. And I guarantee you're going to learn something about each other. And sure enough, like you look at this and I'm like, I had no idea you wanted to spend more time in New England. Like what does that mean? Right? Like my wife went to UConn. So she's like, yeah, I'd like to go back to Boston and Connecticut. And I'm just like, I had no idea you wanted to do that.
Wow.
Why?
This
Yeah.
exercise brought that out. So now it's out in the open. You can talk about it.
Exactly. And like I said,
Wow.
I always wanted to take a river cruise through like old Europe, like the Slovakian countries. And my
Hmm.
wife is like, you hate boats. I'm like, I know I hate boats. I get seasick, but that seems safe. It's not in the ocean.
Yeah.
So, so
Wow.
then we
That's
made a
a
list. Yeah.
great exercise. And I love that you have a
Yeah.
doctor that realizes that it's not just about your blood pressure, it's about your emotions and
Right.
all that. So speaking about emotions, can you go through it? Because you would know this very well, doing this for about 2 decades. What is a guy's emotions? Because guys are so often not in tune with their emotions. What would a guy go through this process be feeling? And the reason I'm asking that is because I can put my finger on a few guys who are going through this stuff, and I
Yeah.
want to normalize what they're feeling because they're probably feeling
Yeah.
alone. And I don't know, is this normal? What are the emotions that go through this process?
Yeah. There's a couple that come to mind. The first one is disappointment. I think a lot of us guys, we define ourselves by our roles. I do the same thing, right? As I mentioned, my background and my nationalities are very old school, right?
Mhm.
And they're very male provider. My dad's 100% Irish, really like old school. Man does this, wife does that, and I think guys view themselves in these roles, and then when they don't fulfill that role, their wife wants a divorce, they feel like they weren't the provider, they weren't the safeguard, the safety keeper. They didn't do their job. And the idea is that, guys, I know we all put those roles, and sometimes society hoists them upon us, and sometimes we put them on our own backs. But certainly you can be disappointed, but it's not your fault, right? This is not like you failed somehow. We all do the best we can. So if you're feeling disappointed that somehow you didn't do something that you should have, that's perfectly normal. Another thing that really is perfectly normal, be scared. I hear a lot of guys when they talk about parenting plans, their fear is they're not going to see their kids. Their fear is their
Mhm.
wife is going to hold the kids away. Their
Yep.
fear is I'm going to be sitting at home with a frozen TV dinner on Thanksgiving by myself and watching some college football game, right? And it's okay to express that. To be an all-in parent is awesome, and it's okay to say I want to do everything I can to see those kids as much as possible, and also to support you, ex-spouse, as much as possible. And that leads into the third one, where there is a certain level of anger. And so the anger comes through either the rejection, right? So you don't want to be married anymore. Look at all these things I've done for you. We see this a lot with our high net worth guys because look, they're on a plane 3 of the 4 weeks a month. They're traveling internationally. They're not seeing their kids. They're coming home late. They're burnt out. They're getting screamed at by bosses. Sure, they got the trappings, the multi-million-dollar houses. They got the cars. They go on the vacations, and they're like saying, "But look at all I've done for you. Look at all I've given you." And the wife is meanwhile, it's just like, "I'd like you to be home for dinner. Like, I don't care about this house. I just would like to sit down as a family. Can we do
Mhm.
that without you on your, device?" And so then guys get angry. And then what happens is they start to try to take it out on them through the support process, by trying to pay less child support, pay less alimony, property division, those kinds of things. And it's not, the divorce process should not be a moment to exact your revenge. It's a moment to really self reflect, because it takes two to tango, kids, right? We all get in arguments with our spouses, and we all look at them and we're like, oh, I can't believe you did that. And then when you go away quietly, like, yeah, I was kind of a jerk,
Mhm.
right?
Realization.
So,
So you said disappointment, fear, anger. That's kind of a process that you see a lot of guys go through.
yeah,
And how
exactly.
come, because I think this is a big deal. How come and I just don't know if it's just a vocabulary word that I'm not aware of, but I'm really interested. Trappings, like that big house and the houses. Why is that
Yeah.
called trappings?
Yeah, because the guys feel compelled to continue to work these jobs. And the wives, and what happens is, and this we were talking a little bit before about shared goals and communication. I'm telling you, Joel, if I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say this, I would be retired right now. And it was basically where one person can't believe that the other, and this is both ways, can't believe the other doesn't recognize all they're doing for them, right? And so them, in this case with the guys, is like, I'm working this job. You drive that car. You wear those clothes. You've got the Pottery Barn furniture, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
And the wife is like, that's great and all, but the trappings are that we're trapped in this lifestyle now because
Mm.
I didn't want this big house. You did because your friend bought the big house, and I don't
Mhm.
need the big fancy car. I live here in Southern California, and there are more Porsches on the road than any other car that I see around here. Now, I drive a Subaru Crosstrek because I'm a real frugal car guy because I have a dog and I want to throw the dog in the back and it's covered in slobber, right? I don't want a fancy car. I could buy one, but I don't want one, right? But these folks have now gotten trapped into these cars and these houses and these lifestyles. And if they just could maybe take a step away and realize that all of this BS doesn't really matter, what matters is this relationship. And because when my wife and I first started out together, we got married later. So we were a little more comfortable. We each owned a house and stuff like that. But there was a point where when we started equitable mediation, and we were eating nachos for dinner pretty much every night. And it was a big deal when we could afford guacamole because we just had cheese, salsa, and maybe we had sour cream, maybe. And then when we had guac, it was like, oh my God,
You made
right?
it.
But right, we made it, but we laughed because we knew we were living in this place and we're just like, but this is what we want to do. And we're watching, no lie, reruns of CSI Miami. Swear to God, that was our thing after the day. We'd watch Horatio Kane and our plate of
Yeah.
nachos, but we were so happy, and we always made sure that we never lived beyond our means, never let our debt get away from us, get too big for our britches, as they say, right? and
I
and
love
and
that.
humility. Yeah, humility counts, man. It really does because it's the relationship that mattered.
Yeah, I know that many people who know my wife and I personally just don't get it. They don't know
Mm-hmm.
why we live the way that we live. We live in a very nice house in a great neighborhood, but
Yep.
that's it. We drive used cars. I have a 2-year-old truck that I bought under warranty,
There you
still
go.
17,000
Perfect.
miles. It's got
Yeah.
no bells and whistles. So some friends have asked me, they said, you can buy whatever car you want. Why don't you buy that? And I've told them
Right.
at 50 years old and before that, I learned that none of these things made me happy. And in fact, if I
Yep.
bought this thing, then this and the other one, now I'm pressured. I'm going to be stressed
Yep.
out. How am I going to show
Yep.
up as a husband, as a father, as everything?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to be chasing because I got to get the next thing and the next thing. And when you buy
Yep.
that house that's 4 times bigger, guess what the property taxes are like, and even the electrical bill and the cleaning bill, because
Oh
you're not
yeah.
going to clean up a eight
My
bedroom house
God.
by yourself, right? All
I
these things.
know.
So I'm glad you said it because you're an expert
Yeah.
on divorce and you see that these are things that just make it worse. So I hope, man, I hope somebody hears that and somehow
Yeah.
can communicate properly and convince their spouse to live a simpler life, which I think, in my opinion, I think in yours is a happier life. Okay, so someone is potentially, or someone, whether they're going through it or they know someone and they're listening to this and they know someone who's about to go through it or they're going through it.
Yep.
When's it too late? Can they contact you halfway through in the beginning? When should they start talking to you?
Yeah. So the best time to contact us is after you've made the decision to divorce, but before you've entered the process. This way, the gloves are not off. You haven't each retained lawyers. You haven't started throwing the depositions and the notices and the demands back and forth. Certainly, we do have people who do get on that path and then realize, like, what the heck are we doing here? Let's just get off this roller coaster and mediate. But for the most part, the decision, it really sets the tone. When you think about it, if you and I, we were going out and let's say I don't know, I showed up 15 minutes late and you were like, hey man, good to see you. And I'm like, dude, I'm so sorry I'm late. You'd be like, no problem. Let's get to the game. As opposed to, Joe, you wasted my time, man. Come on, you're so disrespectful. Like the tone just changed, right? And at the end of the day, when you think about it, that tone it carries, man. It does. Whatever you set, you that first foot, your first step you take, that's the tone. And if it starts off on the right foot, then the tone will be amicable. The process will go smoothly. You'll come to an agreement. If you start off on the wrong foot, you know the path, you know where you're going. We've all seen it on TV. We've talked to our friends and family, and that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid getting on that path at all. And that's the key. So, soon as you think about the divorce, think about mediation. And the beauty of mediation is that it's non-binding until you make it so. And so if somebody comes through, right, and we have this, and we always say, look, we don't require you to retain attorneys. That's not the way we do it. But after you're done, if you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I would just feel better if I had a lawyer look at this thing just to make sure that it's fair and it makes sense and all that. It's like, it's totally fine, right? This way, you've already made up your mind. You've already come to your agreements. You don't walk into the lion's den where they're like, okay, I see paychecks,
And
because
typically, in an attorney,
it's
from your experience,
a,
they don't try to unravel this and start a big mess.
no, that's the key. When you work with us, we have colleagues who are mediation friendly, and some of them don't want that because the folks I talk to, and this kind of comes as a surprise. I have some colleagues, that they're very funny about it. They'll get a case, and they'll have a client come to them, and then they'll see who the other spouse has as their attorney, and they
Hmm.
might let the case go because they're like, I don't want to deal with that attorney. That attorney is a pain in the butt, and
Uh,
they even have their own scruples and morals, right? And the attorneys, if you get the right attorney, a mediation friendly attorney, they're going to support you. They'll go, you know what, here's some suggestions I would make. But again, this looks good, or here's what I would tell you, and I would cross this T and dot this I. And that's our network, right? Those are the folks that when we have a client and they want to see an attorney, we practice in 6 different states, so we have colleagues in all those states. And then this way, you can have a more smooth experience, right? It's just an extension of the mediation process rather than a, oh my gosh, because if you pick the wrong attorney, that's exactly what will happen. They will try to flip the apple cart over because it's all billable hours for them, right? There
yeah,
is no end in sight. And that's
yeah.
the other thing that people forget. Yeah.
This is all good to hear. I joined a dad's group on Facebook that I do not run. I'm just there quietly listening to things people put because I can learn about the issues.
Yeah.
And so often it's about divorce, and everybody's first advice, lawyer up. You got to go heavy. You got to go hard at them. And it's like what you just said. That's your first statement. That's how you're
Yeah.
going to do it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's
Uh,
a tremendous mistake because they think, just in the parlance, right? Guys, I don't want to get screwed. That's the
yep.
phrase we hear a
Yep.
lot during our first meeting, right? I don't
Yep.
want to get screwed. Well, you're going to get screwed if your attorney's bills are $200,000,
Mhm.
because a litigated divorce is going to cost $100,000 to $200,000. And if your wife is working at home, right, is working inside the home, aka stay at home mom, where do you think that's money's coming
Mhm.
from? It's not coming from her paycheck. It's coming from your
Yeah.
savings account, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? And I've had people, one thing I will tell you, quick story. I was at a networking, cocktail hour. And, I'm standing talking to a colleague, and you know how like you're in a conversation, but you can hear a conversation over your shoulder.
Hmm.
And behind me was an attorney I knew from the circles, and one that I knew was that kind of bill kind of
Hmm.
person. And I overheard this person say, and I'm going to change some of the names so that, that's the other thing. Oh man, I am so happy this case is going to trial because I just got the tuition for my youngest from Stanford. I just
Oh,
got the bill, and this is just going to really help me. And I'm
uh,
like, I was like, I'm telling you, if I had like a cocktail wiener or something, and I would have been like, like I gotta put this down, right? And that
oh,
is unfortunately the prevailing, thought pattern because the system's set up that way to bill by the hour, right? We do flat fee mediation. That's an important distinction. So for us, we have no interest in extending it because we're in the box with you, right?
yeah,
We lose, because the more time I spend, let's be honest, right? So
yeah.
we offer you a flat fee and we have an incentive to get you finished because we don't want you hanging out with us for years. We're nice people. If you want us, we get Christmas cards from former
Mhm.
clients. That's awesome. I love that, right? They send us
Yeah,
emails. How you guys doing? I'm getting remarried. Oh my God. That I want to hear. I want to hear from you socially. I want to hear from you personally. I don't want to be talking to you a year from now. That's a problem. We got some
yeah.
problems at that
Okay, so
point.
someone is convinced they got to learn more. They got to talk to you.
Yeah.
Equitablemediation.com.
Yep, exactly. And you'll see up there's a learning center. So you go to the learning center and there's all kinds of stuff. There's courses, there's articles, there's podcasts, videos. Like we have a YouTube channel, so you can look us up on YouTube. And really just our goal 17 years ago, I decided when my mom was getting a divorce, I remember she really had to spend a lot of money because the only person who could answer her questions was a lawyer. And in order to go to speak to the lawyer, you have to pay by the hour. And so she would. And my mom was working part-time when her divorce. She really wasn't even working. Then she saw the writing on the wall and got a part-time job. And I said to myself, I'm going to just put as much information out there for people, let them get educated. It's all you can eat buffet. Just come on in, read, learn, take what you want. And then if we can help you, there's a little button up there. You can get a free consult. If it's just you and you're early in the process, make a call. You'll speak to my partner, Cheryl. So Cheryl is our divorce coach. She helps manage the emotional side of the house. So if it's just you, guys, you're early in the process, just you, or if you and your wife have decided, yep, mediation is for us, then you'd book a meeting with me, right? Because I have to work with both people at the same time. I'm neutral and I can't just talk to one,
Yeah.
at a time. And so,
Yeah.
check that out. We practice in California, Washington, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So we practice in those 6 states. If you're the information is nationwide, right? It applies to everybody. But if you live in one of those 6 states, we can certainly help you, with your divorce.
Excellent. Equitablemediation.com, and you go to the Learning Center and
Yep.
learn. And if you want to
Yep.
contact them,
Absolutely.
reach
Yep.
out through the website. Joe, thank you so much for not just being here, but for what you do, man. I think this is a lot better
Yeah.
than
Thanks.
being taken to the cleaners by battling it out, and and like you saw, the effect that it has on children makes it, in
Mm-hmm.
your own life, you had to go through that.
Certainly.
So what a
Yep.
responsible way to go about it is working with you guys, and
Yeah.
having a more peaceful outcome. Joe, thank you
Yep.
very much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Joel.